Greetings, everyone. Your cartoonist pal Stan here with another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon, the show that I'm doing to celebrate the fact that this is the 50th anniversary of the game Dungeons & Dragons and the entire hobby of role-playing. And I'm doing that by interviewing people that I have known and worked with, some people that are even new to me, too. And while I'm doing that, I do a cartoon homage to a classic piece of Dungeons & Dragons art. While we're talking, it's like I'm two people at once. Anyway, you probably know that. If you're watching this, we're not live. Usually the show is live, but in order to get some of the people on that I want, Wednesdays aren't great for everyone. And so I'm decided to start recording a few for later on. And thankfully, that means that I can have a conversation with today's guest, who is Peter Adkison, the founder of Wizards of the Coast, the owner of Gen Con LLC, and a terrific gamer that it's been my pleasure to be friends with for a number of years now. So I'm just going to bring him on here rather than butcher his background and let him give his own account of himself. And the wrong button, Stan. There we go. Peter, thank you for joining me. I'm really glad you could make it.
Oh, thank you for having me, Stan. I love the idea of butchering the background. I think that could be rather fun. I mean, that could almost be a cartoon idea, right? Take some gamer, some famous gamer in the gaming industry, and butcher their background.
That's what you get. Oh.
You thought he started Wizards of the Coast. He actually worked on World of Cinnabar. Something like that.
Yes, I'm really comfortable. I'm surprisingly comfortable just turning the camera on and talking, but I don't think as quickly as I talk. I'll sometimes get
that's a lot of people have that problem. They're not thinking while they're talking.
Michael, thank you for joining us, and Chris, thank you for coming in too.
Thanks for me as well.
Yeah. Chris says, I read the Slaying the Dragon book and came to realize how crucial Peter is to saving TSR. Yes, and bringing people like Margaret and Tracy back into the fold. Absolutely true, and we can make that. Now, Peter, I'll tell you, Peter, one of the things that happens in all of these conversations is I try and keep them down to a little more than an hour, and all of us have more stories than that. So we can pick and choose.
I'm not in a hurry. You call it when you want to call it.
Well, I like to be kind to my guests and my viewers. And it leaves it open to maybe have you back. Whatever we don't talk about, we'll do it another time.
You're a natural showman.
Anyway, so I hit your two highlights as founding Wizards and owning Gen Con. Is that what you would, if you had to do the quick intro to Peter Adkison, is that where you'd go?
That's a good question. I mean, it's almost seems like an obvious question, but it's phrased in a very nice way, interesting way. I don't think I've ever been quite asked that. But yeah, I think that's me. I think started Wizards of the Coast in 1990. It took over my life. The decade of the 90s was me at WotC. I started it in 1990, left in 2001, very beginning 2000. So it really bookends the decade for me.
Pretty successful decade, really.
Yeah, it really set myself up for how do you follow up on that? How do you follow? But Gen Con has been a nice follow up on that. In that, in 2002, a year after leaving WotC, I acquired Gen Con from WotC, and have owned it ever since. I mean, with some excellent partners, and
right.
And very, very thankful I did. Really loved Gen Con. I loved it for at least a decade before I ever went to Gen Con. I loved it so much because you remember back in the day when Dragon Magazine every year would talk about it. And before that, I was a subscriber to the General. And when Gen Con was a wargaming convention, it made the cover of the General twice. And so I thought it was that and Origins were the epicenters of gaming. Yeah, it turned out I
Yeah,
was right.
pretty right on that. I think one of the interesting things about this conversation, I've talked to a bunch of people who've had a lot of different roles. I mean, this is, uh, I guess, you're the 26th or 27th interview in this series. Um, and I have people who've been designers and editors and artists and creative directors. And you've done some of those things too. But your main entry came from being a gamer who had a vision. And I think that's going to be certainly interesting in that it's going to affect what your particularly your early career is like.
Yeah, I am a gaming industry serial entrepreneur, if you will. Like I had sort of ideas of game design when I started. I thought, we started Wizards of the Coast originally to make RPG supplements
Mm.
like the Primal Order, which I did write with a lot of help. But I very quickly decided, no, I'm just going to focus on the business. I don't really actually think I'm a good game creator, game designer, or a good writer, and so I have been able to focus primarily on that throughout my time.
Awesome. Let's start before that. I realize I'm leading you into this into what I want to talk about second. I'm not starting with the first. Although one thing I meant to tell you in our pre-show, the last two shows I've done, we've had weird tech problems, and I think I solved them. But it's possible that this will crash in the middle of our conversation. Anyone who's watching, if that happens, we'll reboot and be back. It won't be a problem to get it back going again. But there was a problem that the only way to figure it out was to recreate it. I got to the point where I couldn't recreate it, so I think it's fixed.
Maybe it's fixed. I did notice it froze up there for a moment, but
Yeah, we're having the lagginess has gotten a little worse, which made me go. I didn't tell Peter, but
yeah.
we'll see. I think it's knock on plywood. So you started like we all did as a gamer, and clearly as a war and board gamer. When did you start playing what we call hobby games these days?
Yes. Well, I grew up in a family of my family liked to play games, but of course, games like Pinochle and Monopoly and stuff like that. So it was definitely in the culture of the house, more so I would think than most houses that we play games a lot. And it was when I one year for Christmas, my grandmother takes me to a toy store, and we were poor. So when Grandma came to town, that was a chance to like make a little, get a little prize. So we go to, and she's like, what do you want?" And it's Christmas time, and I just based on the cover art, I picked out three, not realizing what they were, Avalon Hill war games.
Okay.
And so it was like Gettysburg and U-boat and Bismarck, I think, were the three that I picked out because ships look great,
Right.
in art.
Right.
Turns out that ship combat's not quite as much fun as land combat, but the ships sure look great in art. So that was the springboard into hobby games, was old Avalon Hill and then SPI style board war and Conflict and a bunch of other wargaming companies. And so that was, throughout the 70s for me. I was born in 1961, so by 1970, I'm 9 years
Right.
old. I'm right at the time when I'm starting to, want something more interesting than Monopoly for games. And so we started playing. My dad, my mom, not so much, but my dad, and they tended to be two-player games, so it's perfect. My dad and I loved these war games, and we went on a deep dive into wargaming. We probably had 100 of those war games by the time I found D&D, which was late 70s.
Do you what was it that you first discovered D&D through?
So I first of all I had to get my passion for fantasy ignited.
Right.
My older brother gave me a copy of The Hobbit, boy, how many times have you heard this story?
Oh, it's my
Right?
story too, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah, it was The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings. And, I read all 4 books in like 5 days. It was, and then it was like fantasy became so interesting. Then I
right,
started wanting to read more fantasy, and it was out there, but it was a little hard to find. And I didn't know what D&D was. Funny, I had heard of Tunnels and Trolls
oh,
before because I was a subscriber to the Flying Buffalo's favorite magazine, the TSBFM, which because I regularly played Nuclear Destruction and Battle Plan by mail,
right. Play by mail.
play by mail from Rick Loomis's company, Flying Buffalo Inc. FBI. So I kind of heard a little bit about fantasy gaming. I was kind of intrigued. I had no freaking idea really what it was, though, until at a game store, again, with my grandma in 1978. And I had a box war game in my hand, Atlantic Wall, one of these big
Yeah,
SPI monster games, they called them, but that was just a reference to the size, nothing else. And I'm standing at the counter and I see the blue box set
yeah,
D&D, the blue box with Quasqueton, In Search of the Unknown.
yeah.
And just on instinct, but I had not heard of Dungeons and Dragons. It says Dungeons and Dragons on it, but I hadn't heard of that. So on instinct, I set down the Atlantic Wall. I picked up the blue box set and told Grandma this is what I want, and she got it for me. And I went home, and the funny thing was, is I didn't. My mind never on my own wrapped around the idea of what role playing really was, like this, that you could do anything you wanted to, that the rules were just a way to help the DM tell a story with the players. I missed all that. I tried to play it like a board game. Of course, I didn't know it. I went back to school. I didn't know anybody who played, so I
Hmm.
became the dungeon master, and I'm trying to run this game, and I'm running it. They're going through the dungeon. They're killing monsters. They're going up levels. Eventually, I accidentally TPK'd the entire party with a red dragon, and then nobody wanted to play again, which
Aw,
forever sort of scarred me in the sense that I've never been like one of those vicious TPK type dungeon
right,
masters ever
right.
since. Because the one nobody wanted to play anymore. It's like, well, this isn't any fun. So that it wasn't until a few months later when I got to, I think of the beginning of my D&D story really is a few months later, the first time I was a player at a table with a dungeon master who knew what they were doing.
Right.
And then I was like, oh my God, this is
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's and it's weird. It's so hard for people who weren't around then to imagine that it was so different from anything that existed.
Yeah.
This the idea of. I mean, what it's there are people. For me, it immediately grabbed me. I'm like, that's what I want something to be, right? Because the people who give personalities to the top hat when they're playing Monopoly want to play a role playing game, right? Um,
Right.
but finding anyone that doesn't immediately get that, these games were impenetrable, and for years that's been the problem, right? Is you need to have a DM to lead you through a game for you to understand why you want to play this game.
Yeah. Yeah, that is, I remember Ryan Dancy saying it at WotC after he acquired TSR, him summoning up as the most difficult, the most important part of this game is the dungeon master, and you can't put him in the box.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's.
All right, so I'm going to have a brief pause. Oh, good.
Are you supposed to be drawing? Are you supposed
Oh,
to be
yeah, that's
drawing?
what I was going to say. That's the important part. And my
Well, hey, while you're doing that, I'll give an answer here to in chat. Chris Andrews asking if there were other WotC properties that I would like to have seen as a live action. I think the Dragonlance is a great idea. He puts Dragonlance there. I also like. I also wanted to see a great Dominaria Magic the Gathering movie.
Yeah.
About the Urza, about the Brothers' War, with Urza and Mishra off doing crazy shit. I don't know. It'd be kind of fun. Um, and thank you for. He also mentioned being mentioned in Ben Riggs's book. So thank you for buying his book. So thank you for supporting a author trying to document. Um, and by the way, that's a good shout out. Like, hey, Ben Riggs, John
Yeah.
Peterson, these guys who are going through not, doing not just interviews, but like digging into the documents,
Right.
like actual physical evidence of what happened throughout the history and doing analysis of what led to what. That's such an exciting part of our hobby. I'm really, really glad that he's doing that.
I'm
Slaying
part of.
Dragon there.
Yeah. So I love books with dust covers, but I take them off while I'm reading them so I don't ruin the dust cover. That's the kind of weird collector I am. The dust cover is
Yeah.
supposed to protect the book. I'm like, no, that's what I want to see. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to be doing some drawing. We are working on, as I said at the top of the show, I do drawings. I'm doing one drawing from each year of the 50 years Dungeons and Dragons has been around, and for this show, we're up to 2004, and I'm doing this Wayne Reynolds cover from the basic D&D Basic game that came out in 2004. So I'm going to start working on that.
And I can tell
um,
Michael Pastor, no, I have not listened to that podcast, but I just recently became aware of it, and I'm looking forward to When We Were Wizards.
I just became aware of that too. I think Monty Cook told me about it when we were chatting the other week, and so I'm looking forward to hearing that.
Oh, that's great. Monty, what a great guy.
He is. He is. Um, okay, so you got a DM that finally got you to understand why this game was so awesome. Um, and so that then became one of your
Yeah,
major hobbies.
yeah. So can I tell you a story from that first moment?
You
I said,
absolutely can.
yeah, I will never forget this because I've been, because the weird thing is I had been running it like a war game, right? So I go over to this guy's house and, sit down and roll up a character. And it was so weird. Like, I think today people would be like how you meet people back before the internet, right? So I did it because there was one store in town that sold these types of games. It wasn't a game store, it was a model railroad
Right.
store. It's
Yeah,
called
that's come up in quite a few conversations too. Like you had to go to the model railroad store or the slot car store.
or the knitting store,
Right.
anything that was like a hobby, yeah. And so I went to this model railroading store and they had a section of books. Now over the years that I was playing in that particular town, the game section got bigger and bigger and bigger, and the model railroading section got smaller and smaller. But anyway, so there was a billboard there where you could find people to play with, and so there was a guy named Steve Shropshire. He had put his name up there looking for D&D players, and here's my phone number, and you just pick up the phone and call the guy and say, yeah, I'll come over to your place Saturday night and play. I mean, we were teenagers and our parents were letting us go
Right.
over to strangers' houses to play games that some people thought were satanic. That's just fun. That's just good, clean fun. So I went over to this guy's house and it was all cool and safe and everything. His father was a math teacher, and we played D&D in his basement. And I sat down and I rolled up a character with a couple of guys that were there. And I'm sitting at the table, and he goes, "Okay, your character's ready? Yep. Okay, you're in a bar." And suddenly the door opens and the wind whistles through, and this old mountain man comes into the bar and he climbs up on a table and he goes on a rant. He's like, "Oh, the orcs are just overrunning the countryside. They're just destroying farms and molesting the people and taking people to slaves, and the nobles aren't doing anything about it. And what, is there anyone who will do anything about this? And then the DM just like crosses his arms and sits there and looks at you, and all of a sudden I got it. Like, oh, I can just go talk to this guy, and this is going to be the beginning of a story, not a board game. And I just was in love at that moment. And that moment, just like my whole world just got turned upside down. Like, oh, this is different. There's nothing like this ever that's been in the world of games.
Right.
And that's when I also like realized, oh, I could just create my own world here and just start doing whatever I wanted to do and stuff. And I've loved it ever since. That's great.
Yeah, and like I was saying before, that's it. It was so different that it's weird. You'd think once you know about it, well, it's so easy. Of course, everyone understands it, but the light had to be turned on that this was a possibility, that this could be a game, something you'd do. Tell a story.
Yeah, and that there were no guardrails really. Like there's no board that you're moving a peg around, because when I was playing it like a dungeon, then there was a board that you're moving around. I mean, like I was counting how many squares you moved and where everybody's position was, and like, okay, we're in turns now instead of rounds and all this sort of stuff. Yeah.
I've told this on the last couple of episodes, but when my first real D&D product was the same one you were talking about. But when I heard about it and decided I wanted to try to get into it, it was during one of those times when it was just sold out and you couldn't get any. And so the only thing I could get was the coloring album. This is one of those years where adult coloring books were all the rage, kind of like they were a couple of years ago. And TSR did a license of kind of fancy coloring pages with a story written by Gary Gygax.
Nice.
And in the center of it is a little board game.
Oh.
Which really is what helped me understand what the game was, right? Because the board game is like a super simple dungeon, dungeon the board game, but it kind of, you're going through room to room looking for treasure and reading the story in the coloring books, and and the important part is what happens to these people along the way. I get it.
Right, exactly. That's funny how the board game, the analogy to a board game, helped you understand D&D, but it kind of got in the way of me understanding D&D.
Yeah.
It gave me it sent me in the wrong direction. I was playing it like a board game and didn't realize how this. And by the way, I'm going to tell Chris, I will answer your question later in the show about the future of TTRPGs, because I happen to know.
Yeah.
I read the agenda. I've got an agenda here. It's like that's the last thing on the list.
We're fancy here. We have agendas.
Yeah.
All right. So you played in high school and through college, and then you went on and just had a job, right?
And let's not downplay. I played in high school and college. I was obsessed with D&D in high school and college. I mean, I played it all the frickin' time. We just played a ton of D&D, and I really got into what back in the day was called Munchkinism or power gaming, where what were the highest level characters you had, and what was the highest plus on their swords and armor and all this sort of stuff like that. One of the games that was one of the products that was influential on me as a kid was the Arduin Grimoire. Yeah, and it was like Judges Guild, like many things that were published back in the 80s. It was for Dungeons and Dragons, but they didn't have a license, so it doesn't say Dungeons and Dragons, but wink, wink, nod, nod. We all knew it was for Dungeons and Dragons. And the Arduin books had progression. The class charts for levels went up to 100th level, and oh boy, that was cool. So that seriously warped my sort of view of what perhaps what one should do playing Dungeons and Dragons. And I will say that it was all made retroactively okay 20 years later when World of Warcraft came out. Anyway, uh, so yeah, I played a lot of D&D. I had a huge group. I probably at least 20 to 30 people that I was playing with regularly, and probably double that in terms of people that I played with sporadically. I was running Chaldea, which is my fantasy world that I've been developing ever since then for these people. I was playing in other people's campaigns. We created a portal system where characters could go back and forth between different campaigns. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to run over Butch's world. Oh, now I'm over Russ's world, and it was just madness. It was crazy. We get these heated arguments about what was fair, what was. I mean, it was high school drama around the D&D table. There were a lot of girls in our group, so there was a lot of that going on as well. It was a social scene, and it was a lot of fun, very very exciting, and sometimes heated. And oh, here Chris has a favorite character from my play sessions over the world. I had a character, probably the first character I had that got to be high level, like divine status, named Alcor. And there's a funny story about it in that my dear friend Steve Connard, who was with me throughout much of this time and has been with me in every business that I've done over the last 30 years, Steve Connard designed the Legends set for Magic the Gathering, the Legends expansion. This is like 1994, 95 type period. And he 94. He put a card in there called Alcor's tome, because Alcor was a powerful wizard. Well, somewhere in the process from him writing that to it getting edited, it got changed to Alcor's tomb.
Oh dear.
And, yeah.
So he inadvertently killed your character.
Yeah, I guess. I said, well, Alcor's tomb, he's not dead. And he looks at the card. No, it's supposed to be tome, not tomb. And I'm like, you did this on purpose. And he still denies it to this day. No, I did not. Yeah. How did we get? Yeah, Michael wants to know how we got girls in our group. That's a really good question. Well, we went to school. We just invited girls to come play. It was just I don't know how it got started. And once you have one or two girls showing up, they're bringing other girls, and pretty soon you have a bunch of girls in the group.
I think so. I've talked to a bunch of people whose experience was similar to that, and I think that the part of it is what you're saying, right? Early on, there was a girl who was interested, who was able to tell her friends, don't worry, it's okay, we're having fun. But the game got a reputation on its own, and as we all know, if the people who are playing it are people who take it a little too seriously, then it's not just girls that don't want to play. It's anyone who's not in that group really feels like this is not for me. But if you've got a good social group and everyone understands it's a storytelling game, women have always been interested in this.
Yeah, well, and we had one girl and then two girls who were very strong personalities, and so when one of the guys, I won't mention names, started,
Steve Connor? No,
wasn't Steve Connor, but there was a guy who was that guy that you're talking about who took things too seriously. I mean, these two girls just ganged up on him and like started effing with him, and so like, I mean, it was like, I just got lucky enough that I knew I was able to get a lot of girls to come over and play, and a couple girls that were just really strong personalities and super smart and just outplayed him. So anyway,
Yeah, I think
so
that the thing we've learned in the modern era is that you have to be good. You've got to set a good social rules at the table. It's got to be a good social group, and it was a little too Darwinistic in a lot of the early groups. Just the
yeah,
DM would be like, they'll sort it out themselves.
yeah. So yeah, so I when I graduated from college, I moved to Seattle along with several of friends of mine that we gamed with in Walla Walla, which is a town where I went to college.
Mm.
And we,
Where did you grow up? We Was it in
I,
Washington State or in?
I grew up in Idaho,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah, so I grew up in Idaho, but by the time I was in college, I was going to college in Walla Walla, which is in the same state as Washington, as Seattle, but it's on the opposite side of the state. So we weren't actually very close to Seattle, but uh, but I grew up on a farm, and I was kind of like, by the time I got out of college, I wanted to go to the city. I was just like,
Right.
I, I was that kid who loved the farm, but really wanted to get to the city. And so, literally the day after I graduated from college, I moved to Seattle, and various friends that I had gamed with moved to Seattle also, either before me or after me, and we kept gaming, and we had fantasies of starting Wizards of the Coast or a game company. Um, as early as sometime during college, we had started floating around this idea that hey, it'd be cool to start a game company. And my one of my friends said, "Well, yeah, if we do, we should call it Wizards of the Coast." And the name came from a Wizards Guild in another D&D campaign that we played in. So we played in this guy named Butch. He had this campaign called Terra Garden, and the Wizards of the Guild were like his pet. Like you didn't mess with the Wizards of the Guild
Right.
because they were the DM's pet. And if one of the Wizards of the Guild showed up on the battlefield, you're like, oh shit, this is bad. We better get out of here. And so it created in our minds, because of the way the DM played these Wizards of the Guild, Wizards of the Coast, excuse me. They had a elevated. They had a panache to them. They had
Right.
an aura about them of coolness, and so that's why that was why we wanted to name the company Wizards of the Coast. not
Huh?
not some big marketing campaign. It was like a simple conversation. One person says we should start a game company. Another
Yeah.
person says let's call it Wizards of the Coast, and then I said that's a great idea. Let's do it.
Done.
And then somebody else says maybe we should finish college first. That's also a good idea. So it was like a 10-minute conversation, and then it was literally like, 8-10 years later when we actually did start Wizards of the Coast after we moved to Seattle. And you're right, I was working. I didn't just immediately go to college to start a game company. I went and worked at the Boeing company for 6 years.
You know what? You
Doing
know what I don't. What did you do at Boeing?
what did I do at Boeing?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I started as a data entry person, which is with a computer science degree. That's quite a letdown from what the job you think you're going to have. I
Yeah.
was doing this part-time teaching at a local VOTEC type school. That's the first job I actually got, but it was part-time, and it was a sleazy school. It was like, I was enjoying it because I've got a gift of the gab. So doing so teaching was a natural fit for me. I liked it, but I got I had applied for a bunch of different jobs, and one of the jobs I applied for was an engineer placement agency. Even though I wasn't an engineer, I convinced them to take my resume. They called me. This is like a year later. I
Hmm.
barely remembered who they were because I applied to like 200 companies, and they said, "Hey, we have it's a data entry job," and I'm like, "Oh, that's horrible." But it's at Boeing working in Space Systems Division on a NASA contract, and I'm like, I'll take it
Yeah.
because that just sounded too much fun. So I went to so I started off doing data entry, but while I was there, I went and rewrote all the software to make it better. And so then they hired me as a programmer and as a systems engineer, which was, I had no idea what that was, but I said okay. And I worked in this bay of engineers that were working on these proposals for NASA and the Air Force in during the Reagan Star Wars era,
Right.
where the government was investing a lot of money into space technologies. But we never got to build anything. But it was a lot of fun hanging out with engineers all day, all in a big bay where everybody's smoking. That's my main, that's what.
Right. So while you're doing that, the idea of Wizards of the Coast becomes a reality.
Yes. So I had a friend named Ken McLaughlin, who's a co-founder of Wizards with me, and he was an early techie advocate before. This is in 1990, so the internet is a selective sort of thing. Not everybody, most people don't know what it is. It's ARPA. It's a Usenet at the time, or ARPANET, one of the two.
Right.
And he had set it up so that he and I could DM each other, direct message each other from our respective desks in our respective jobs, which is totally unheard of. Like,
Right.
I could be doing this. Somebody walked by and looked at my screen. They have no idea what I was doing. That I'm talking to a friend who's on the other side of the city, and I just said, "Hey, Ken, I think we should start Wizards of the Coast." And then it was like this long pause, and he writes back, "You're serious, aren't you?" And yeah, I think I am. And so we decided we're going to do role-playing game supplements. That's what we wanted to do. We wanted to put all this stuff, all this work that we'd put into creating our RPG campaigns. We had designed many places, worlds, systems, maps, just all the things that people do when they play D&D,
Right.
and are creating their own stuff, more than they're using modules and stuff. And so we started Wizards, and we had no idea what we were doing. We didn't know anybody who was doing this, so it's not like we had mentors really. So Ken and I, in that conversation, we're like, well, how did we make a game book? And and we're just and we just reverse engineered the whole process. Like, well, somebody had to write this. Clearly, we have to write the book. Somebody's got to have artists illustrate it. We got to use some way of laying it out. We got to get all this legal shit that's in the front. We got to create a company. We just literally reverse engineered the whole process of how to make a game book, and then we started working on it, and eventually we did it. Michael asked if Microsoft. Yeah, Microsoft was definitely a thing, and I didn't get on. I wasn't able. I had it, even though I had a computer science degree in 1985 when I graduated. It actually was a bit of a slump in tech that year, because tech, no matter how big it is and how it goes, everything goes in ups and downs. And I graduated, there was a slump and nobody was hiring programmers. So I definitely applied at Microsoft and Sierra Online and AOL, et cetera. So I don't know, I may not apply to AOL. They weren't a Seattle-based company. But,
all right, so you reverse engineered it. You got Talislanta published, and so you had to reverse engineer how to get into distribution too.
Well, there we go. So we started writing the first, and as we were starting to write our game books, 1990 going into 1991, I'm figuring out how to be a game company, and I'm starting to realize, okay, at some point we're going to be done with this book and the other book, stuff like that. This was the Prime Loader. Talislanta wasn't on our radar yet, But then it was the question, how do we distribute it? I wasn't even using the word distribute. I didn't even know that was the word I needed.
Right.
That's how little I knew. And I said, well, we'll reverse engineer that too. I went down to a local game store and I go, hey, I'm starting a game company. I want to make products that you might want to sell, that hopefully you will want to sell in your store.
Right.
How do I sell my games to you? Like, how do you buy your games?
Right.
And he gave me a brief explanation of what the only route in those days, which was to sell. Publishers sold to distributors, distributors sold to retailers, retailers sold to consumers, and there was a little bit of mail order happening out there, but there was no internet sales and certainly no crowdfunding, all sorts of stuff like that. And it was basically what we called the 3-tiered distribution system.
Right.
And he explained it in like 3 sentences, but he was obviously not real enamored with having a long conversation about this. And he says, hey, if you want to do this, if you're serious, you need to go to Las Vegas. Yeah, there's a trade show there called the Gamma Trade Show. And you need to go there and sit through all the lectures from distributors and retailers and other publishers, and you'll learn how the whole thing works. And I'm like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
great. And I was really busy and kind of shy. That's hard to imagine, I know. And I never thought of
you
myself.
well enough to imagine that.
I was not. I was nervous about it. I was shy, and I didn't. I never thought of myself as a good salesperson, which turned out to be wrong because I actually am. I just not how I saw myself, and
Right.
so I took the most outgoing and beautiful man that I knew in our game group, a guy named Rich Kalis, and I sent him to Gamma. I said,
Good choice. Good choice.
go to this trade show and figure out all this stuff for me, and come back and tell me about how to do it. Well, he goes to Gamma. This is in, I don't know, February or March of 1991. And
Right.
can you guess who he meets at that Gamma, who becomes very important to the history of Wizards of the Coast?
Oh, you want me to guess?
Yeah, because I think you know her.
Is that that was not who I was going to meet? Lisa Stevens.
There you go.
All right, that wasn't who I was going to guess, but that her was the giveaway.
Yeah. I was a little hint for you. Because that narrowed the population by 90%.
I tell you, and you know what, Lisa, if you ever watch this, you were the first person I thought of.
That's right, of course. So Lisa, at that time, was a VP at White Wolf. White Wolf had just published the huge hit Vampire the Masquerade. So White Wolf was flying on Cloud 9. She's flying, or Cloud 10, whichever cloud it is. And so so her and Rich met and became friends. And that one thing led to another. She ended up coming up to Seattle to visit us, and I ended up hiring her. And so she knew the answers to all those questions. Like,
Right.
she knew all the distributors. So when we came, and she also, you mentioned Calislana, she also said, hey, if you hire me, I'll bring a whole game line with me. And, I have an old adage that if you hire a salesperson, they should be able to bring in new revenue on day one.
Yeah.
So I hired her, and she did that. She brought in a whole line of games that were established, not a huge line, but a successful line, and with a reputation. So we started Wizard of the Coast. The first thing we did was come out with Prime Order. She did say, Peter, I think you should publish Prime Order first because it's your product. You wrote it. And then we'll come out with Talislana, the new edition of Talislana, like 2 months later. So in 1992, which is about a year after I hired her, we came out with a Prime Order at Origins, and then Talislana 3rd edition at Gen Con. And yeah, that's how we got into. That's how Wizards got started. That's how we got into role-playing games. Although it wasn't the role-playing game,
Right.
and it wasn't. And by the time Talos Atlantic came out, before that, during that 2-year period it took to make these two games, from 1990 to 1992, in the middle of there, I met Richard Garfield, and Richard, of course, goes
Right.
on to design Magic the Gathering, which comes out a year after Primal Order and Talisman in 1993. And that, of course, is the big break for Wizards of the Coast. That's the game that puts us on the map in a big way and catapults us up to having enough money to buy TSR when it got in trouble.
Right. Okay. So now you you do that, and that's good because I was about to say I think we could keep talking about the early days of Wizards of the Coast for another hour, but uh, again, just so we kind of don't tax
Yeah.
people's uh, patience. So a bunch of stuff happens. You are
Yeah.
wildly successful with Magic the Gathering. Wizards of the Coast becomes huge. TSR is in trouble. Now, here's the thing that I know I've heard you talk about this also on other interviews. I My memory is that you were interested in buying TSR and you got rebuffed. They said they
That's
weren't
true.
interested.
Yeah. So we bought TSR in 97. So when did I had a meeting with Lorraine and the guy, the CFO, I can't remember his name. Will?
Will
Yeah.
Martins?
Will Martins. That's it. Yeah. So I had a meeting with Lorraine and Will. I think it was a year earlier. It might have been 2 years earlier. It was at Gen Con. It was Gen Con either 1995 or 1996. They were gracious enough to meet with me. I
Mm-hmm.
met with them and I said, hey, I'm just putting myself out there saying, you know, if you ever want an exit, you've built this company. It's a great company. If you ever wanted an exit, I would, think of me. I'd be happy to buy it. And I think that I offended them. I didn't mean to. And
Well,
so they
they
didn't.
were
They didn't. When
they
they
were
got into
easily
trouble,
offended sometimes.
yeah. When they got into trouble later, they didn't come to me. I was not their first call. That was. It took a while to make that, to get past that and make that deal happen. I
Um,
see Michael asked how I heard about TSR's troubles. I mean, the thing is, everybody knew, right? It really, uh, certainly anybody in distribution or retail knew that TSR was in trouble in '97 because there were no new products coming out for the first,
right. Yeah,
for
there was talk about it in '96, but the last products came out in November of '96, and it very quick there was a schedule. There was a whole '97 schedule, and none of it was coming out. So it became pretty
yeah,
clear.
yeah. It's one thing, and I remember specifically Dragon Magazine not coming out. Like, I mean, you
Yeah,
kind of, because
right,
that's a periodical, and so you kind of set your calendar to that. If a new module's late or a novel's late, well, that happens on a regular. I mean, TSR was actually really good about that not happening very often, but I mean, it's the type of thing that does happen in publishing. But if a magazine's late, there's
right.
a, a big thing. But yeah, so we had the chance. And by the way, since we're on the topic of us acquiring TSR, I
Yes.
want to, I want to show something. Stan doesn't know
Oh,
I am going to show this. So I'm going to show
all right.
something
We're gonna
that
switch
Stan
back.
made
So,
for me.
oh, look at that!
There we go. There we go. Trying to get it centered here.
uh,
Um, uh, Stan, this is one of my most valued possessions.
oh,
This is a card that Stan made after the TSR deal. It shows, a caricature of me and the TSR dragon under a rainbow. And inside, I think everybody who was a
yeah,
TSR employee signed this card.
yeah.
And I bawled my eyes out when I got this. And I can't look at it now without getting teary eyed. It is seriously, thank you,
Wow.
Stan. I feel like this whole interview, you didn't know it, but this whole interview was a chance for me to say thank you for something that I treasure.
Well, now I have nothing to say. So I'll tell you a funny thing about that, though. Um,
Yeah.
that there was a book that came out. I can't remember the big art history book of D&D that I can't remember the
Oh,
title of right now.
is it the? Well, wait. I know the. Okay, I
Yeah,
went to the documentary Eye of the Beholder, but the
yeah. Where all kinds of people were listed in there, right? All the artists, all the cartoonists, all the graphics people, a lot of the game designers. I'm not mentioned in there, but you know what? I thought, my contribution to that end is very small. I would have liked. It would have been nice. But then, like Ed Stark and Bill Slavicsek and other writers that I worked with, they're mentioned in there. I'm not mentioned in there, and I'm thinking, oh man, I got left out completely. And then I'm flipping through it, and there's one page in there that has a photo of that card and a photo that we took on the last day we were in Lake Geneva, and the cover for Dragonlance Fifth Age, which I didn't draw and I didn't write that product, but it's a big part of what I did do, and I got pretty well known for. So it was all on one page. So like, well, my name isn't there. That's my page.
there you go. There you go.
I'm I'm
Yeah.
I'm really glad that. Well, I was glad at the time. It was clear that it meant something when we gave it to you, and I'm glad that I'm glad I did. I didn't screw it up. Is what I'm basically glad.
Well, that's my life in a nutshell. When I when I bought when we bought TSR, and I went to my mentor,
Yeah,
um, and he said, any advice? And he's like, well, just don't. I mean, he used the F word. Just don't
yeah.
F it up. So just, like, okay. Let's see. Chris had questions: proudest decisions and minor regrets. Well, I think the whole process, I'm pretty proud of bringing, we gave offers to almost every employee at the company, and a lot of people came out. Very proud of that. I'm doing third edition. I'm really proud of third edition. I just,
Yeah.
and the subsequent D20 OGL, the combination of those two things was a lightning strike um, for TSR, for D&D. And
And I'll say
uh,
that I try and say this as often as I can that the history of D&D is also bigger. The history of role playing hobbies, right? And that D20 moment and OGL moment, besides being great for the game and great for Wizards of the Coast, was so much of what the game industry, the tabletop role playing industry has turned into, is was born through that. What an important minute that was for.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I'm proud of all that. I'm proud of it was a an acquisition that was a little questionable in terms of the price we paid, in terms of how much debt we took on. So you have to add that to the cash part of the acquisition, and um, but we did make enough money. The revenue came out of it good, and I think it supported the business case. But it meant a lot to me when we sold WotC to Hasbro. Of course, I had a lot of these negotiations with the Hasbro CFO and other executives who were like, "Yeah, we think you overvalued this TSR thing." But then I had a conversation with Alan Hassenfeld, who was a CEO of Hasbro at the time, and one of the Hassenfeld brothers.
Right.
Hasbro stands for Hassenfeld Brothers, um, and he told me, he says, "Peter, I would not have been interested in this company if it wasn't for D&D. Magic's great. I love Magic, but D&D, having two of the best brands in
Right.
tabletop gaming, means that you're not just a one-hit wonder." And so I always felt that was I mean, it's great to do good work on a creative level, but sometimes it's harder to do good business work. You know, to do a
Yeah.
business deal and have it pencil out and come through on the other end. I'm more proud of doing good creative work, but the business, you know, part of me is the entrepreneur piece. The business got to be there too. I got to do a
Yeah.
good job on that piece as well. So, minor regrets. I'm trying to think of anything TSR related that I can say in public that's a minor regret.
that's always the problem. It's, even years later, can't say that in public.
um, you know, I do. Uh, I am also really proud of the relationships we were able to rebuild with some of the important writers, authors especially, because at the time that we acquired TSR was not working with Bob Salvatore or Margaret Weiss or Tracy Hickman, um, and so to bring them all back into the fold and get them writing for TSR again, I felt like that was a really important piece of it. And also, we got a chance to return a lot of original art. I mean, TSR was had all these beautiful original pieces of art in a storage locker, and I just like, you know, what are we going to do with this? I was like, give it back to the artists. I mean, like, you know, I was worried that came across as like me not valuing the art, but no, it was
Right?
like we as a corporation here in Seattle shouldn't be owning these original pieces of art that define the history of Dungeons and Dragons during the period of time when Dungeons and Dragons was in Lake Geneva under different ownership. And you know, so that was very proud of that piece of it. And yeah, the open source. Michael asked if the open source software movement was an inspiration for OGL. I think so. Ryan Dancy would have the best insight
He,
into that.
he
He
certainly
was, I
mentioned
mean,
it early on when we were doing this. He
right.
mentioned that as a comparison. I don't know that he started thinking about that, but even before it went public, it was certainly had an influence.
He was thinking. I do know for a fact that he was thinking a lot about what we call network externalities,
Hmm.
which was something that was very much on people's minds in the '90s. As the way technology was developing. Now, I think we just kind of take it for granted. But you know, why is Windows so powerful when you could argue that Unix or Apple were better? Uh, well, they just had a lot more software available, right? And so you buy a PC because it has more software, and you buy the PC software because you have a PC, and the bigger the network is, um, the more valuable. So his idea was that if you get all of our competitors going from being fully invested in competing against us to at least partially interested in supporting us by producing stuff that works under the context of the OGL, um, that's great when that happens.
Yeah, you know what? One of the things I forget who I was. I don't think it was on the show. I was talking to someone in the last few weeks about the year 2000 when that all happened. And I mean, it was a hard sell inside Wizards. There were a lot of people that didn't get it on the D&D team and throughout the company that didn't get what you were talking about there with the network of externalities and how that would support that we would come out on top of this happen.
Yeah.
But even then, I remember talking to Ryan and the team, and their hope was that they figured the game industry would be a little, people would be uncertain. They would need a little coaxing. But when that came out, and just the people were like, "We can do that now? Yes, please."
And yeah, it was a great move, and I don't deserve much credit for it other than saying yes to Ryan. And I know Ryan, if he were here, I think he would credit Keith Strom and Lisa Stevens and Cindy Rice, who were on his team.
Yeah,
You know, I don't know who deserves or if it doesn't even matter, like who deserves the lion's share of the credit. But that team was the business team, which was a mix of it was a nice 50-50 mix of WotC and TSR people collectively managing the D&D business from the moment it was acquired, and they came up with that.
I was just thinking about what you just said. In my description of it, I would not underplay the role you played by being able. Maybe it wasn't your vision, but you saw it when the easiest thing was to say, "Are you crazy?"
Thank you. Yeah, I immediately loved the idea, for sure. And the network externalities argument. I just finished B school.
Yeah.
So Chris Weiss, as in Margaret Weiss, tells a funny story that when I asked me who killed Dragonlance, and Liz was at the meeting. Liz was like, my mom did that. Yeah, I was embarrassed. Let me tell you, when I did that guffaw. Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot. Boy, we start getting into that level of story. We'll be here for 8 hours. Do you remember? I'm sure you remember. But when you had Morgan and Tracy come out for that first summit, and you took us all out to dinner at Columbia Tower, that in itself was a big kind of cementing. Like the meeting itself, the business got done, but that was kind of a smooth over social and making everybody friends again.
Good. I'm glad. It can be tough. In the world, like I was always not quite sure what I was stepping into because in the world of creative creation, creating like D&D stuff, which is very creative, it can get tense between creators. There can be concerns about who's getting credit for what. I won't mention names again, but every time we talk about Dragonlance, I can think of one person who's upset that his name is not the first name that people think of when we talk about Dragonlance, right?
Yeah.
It is like you're never quite sure who is sitting there biting their tongue or resentful of the fact that I was saying, hey, Bob Salvatore, Margaret Weiss, Tracy Hickman, 3 top authors who've ever written for D&D. I want them back, And at one level, it's kind of like, you don't like it, suck it up, This is at the other level, but I'm trying to be nice to everybody and trying to have everybody happy and everything like that. Here's a good question. You want to talk about the future? Because Chris has a good question.
Okay. Yeah, we're just getting past the hour, so let me. I'm going to stop my drawing here. This is where we got. Good start. I will, as I always do, finish this up offline, and it will. If you are following us, I'll take a little promotional pause to say that if you're following and you're a member of the Substack, 50 Years in the Dungeon.substack.com, you'll be the first ones to see it. Once it's done, it'll go to you, and it'll be at least a week before I show it to the rest of the world. It's a free newsletter. There are, of course, paid levels, and you get things for joining those, but it's free, and I would really appreciate it if everyone joined up. It's a great way to stay in touch with what's going on, and, it makes me feel good. So there we go. I'll plug that again before we roll out at the end of the show. Thank you, Michael. Yeah, I think that Dragon's coming out pretty good, too. Of course, having Wayne Reynolds to start with is a good start. When this show is over, when I hit having done all 50 years, I certainly will want to bring someone on to have a conversation with, which is me talking about what it's been like interpreting all these people's art over the course of the year. Because it's been very interesting for me, and I want to be my own guest.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so that's where we're going to leave this drawing for now. and we'll come back to just you and me. Now, I'm amazed we got through about 2004 in our discussions. And there's still a lot we didn't, but we packed a lot into this hour. But let's look at the future now.
Yeah.
We're at the 50th anniversary, which was the impetus for starting this show, and uh, you've been involved. You and I have both been involved as a hobby since its early days. I think, given the timing of when you started, you and I have been playing D&D for about 91 of the 50 years that it's been around. Uh, what do you think now that we've hit this 50th anniversary, or if you want to go with the question that Chris had posed instead?
Well, I think it's a good transition question because I think it relates directly. So Chris asked, Cynthia Williams was famously quoted in 2022 that D&D is under monetized, and do I agree? Yeah, I do agree. So I love being a little controversial, right? I'll take Cynthia's side on this. I think the way WotC has tried to go after that, they've stumbled a lot in terms of like trying to unwind the OGL and different things like that. But I had to deal with this. I remember in the 90s having two brands. So Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons. The brand awareness of Magic the Gathering is really low. The brand awareness of Dungeons and Dragons is really high. And the profitability is the opposite, right? So when you're sitting in the role of running Wizards of the Coast as a business, this fact is painfully obvious to you that Magic the Gathering is so much higher in revenue and profitability than D&D. And now maybe the difference in brand awareness is closer, like this. But back in the 90s, nobody knew what Magic was unless you were a Magic player. It was pretty small. Now everybody knows what Magic is. Okay, Magic is probably now almost as known as Dungeons and Dragons because it's been around long enough that it's had that generational passing where people remember that there were other people. Maybe they didn't play it when they were a kid, but they remember other people were playing it as a kid. And also, it's associated with Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh and all that sort of stuff like that. So I think it's absolutely true that the D&D is undermonetized. That doesn't give you a license, though, to do things you shouldn't. And the part of the answer to that question, I actually worked on this question after we sold the company to Hasbro, and I was running Wizards of the Coast as a division with Hasbro. The president of Hasbro said to me, "Okay, you've got this great hit with Magic the Gathering, and you've got basically." He was thinking Pokemon. He said, "You've got basically a $500 million business. How do you create another $500 million business on top of this?" And I said, "We write the Dungeons and Dragons MMO." That was my solution to that question. And I think if we'd have worked on a Magic the Gathering MMO, a D&D MMO, excuse me, Dungeons and Dragons MMO, is what I meant to say, starting in 2001 and been first to market instead of we wouldn't have been first to market because there was EverQuest. But yeah, you're not going to do it by just somehow figuring out how to get people to pay more for the books.
Right.
And fiction's not, it has to be something or just, but you got to run the business well that you have and not wish it was some other business. Or you got to do something like make a great MMO back when it would have been the right move to do it. Right. Now that I do think that when the smartest thing I've seen WotC do in the last few years, in my opinion, was buy D&D Beyond. Mm-hmm. I did kind of jokingly refer to it as paying $124 million to get your customers back. But that was a little snarky of me. But it was a smart move given the situation. And I think that if they did a really nice clever, nice to customers, friendly, but clever path on D&D Beyond where you could get the basic level subscription and the player's handbook, everything you need to play for free, but then offer you a lot more for increased functionality. They could get to the point where everybody that plays D&D just about has a subscription to D&D Beyond and pays $5 a month, and would be happy to pay it.
Yeah.
But it's all about how you sell that and how you approach it, and take your time to do it right.
I think. I mean, I'm not the business person you are, and but I've been involved long enough and seen the mistakes happen often enough that it. I think that too often, and I think that Hasbro has done this recently. Too often, the idea of generating more income is built on the idea of, okay, well, we'll take away what they've got, and then they'll come to this other thing. And
no, it's got to be. You have to honestly give everybody a level of free that is meaningful. That is like, hey, if you just want to be a player and play, and your DM's got all the extra stuff and is running, he or she's running on Roll20 or whatever, and bringing all stuff like that, you should be able to participate in a game like that for free. But then seduce them into paying a little bit more for some extra content that they don't have to enjoy it.
But they want to have.
Yeah, but they want it. Freemium. Michael calls it freemium. Yeah. I think that model could work. They just got to be careful how they roll it out.
I think the other thing about D&D that often the people in the last 10 years who've looked at it have not taken the perspective of what they have is a freemium which generates what is it? What were you saying? $2 billion or a few million, $100 million? Well, okay. Don't mess with that, right? That part will continue to make. All right, it's not the money. It's not the right money. It's not enough money, but it's making money. Support it to make more money. Don't fight it to make more money.
Do it with some love and stuff. And by the way, I think Michael also asked about the convention business. I just want to say I'm very bullish on the convention business. So when I think about being a publisher or being a retailer or being a distributor, I wouldn't want to be any of those things today. But we want to work professionally. If you want to run a business in tabletop gaming, I think a convention, go to a decent sized city that doesn't have a good convention, or even if they have a good one, just pick a different date on the calendar. Just get 6 months later and start in their convention. I think conventions are a great opportunity, and it's like anything now. You have to have a little bit of a networking, social media. You have to make friends in that city. You gotta get people, get event organizers, people that will run games to come to your convention and run games. Treat them well, treat them with a lot of love, give them free passes, reward them for the work they do. They'll bring in more players, and get the right contract with your hotel. Meaning that you can get to a place where you don't have to pay anything for the hotel. You don't have to pay for the space. You just have to promise. If enough people are getting rooms at the hotel, then you get the space for free. So that's kind of where there's the basics of running a convention, and it's doable.
It would be really interesting. It is a very interesting conversation to have about how conventions have grown and changed, and since we first started going, but even since you first got involved as an owner at Gen Con, what conventions are, who's coming to them, and what they expect out of it convention culture has morphed and grown a lot.
Well, it's people want to get together with other people, and unfortunately, really unfortunately, game stores have had a difficult time being the dominant place where people get together and do that, and so we need a convention pairs with that nicely. So
All right. Well, anything else you have to say about the or have we gotten off the future of D&D and we need to still cover that? Or
I would just the future of D&D. Yeah, I don't know. I think okay. I'll take my one pat response about that. I think that um, and I don't know if this is D&D or board games too. Tabletop gaming, I think intelligent game pieces are the future. I think there will be
yeah,
that somebody's going to find the killer app for creating miniatures or creating token meeples that are that know where they are, know what they are, and know how to communicate with other meeples and other game
right.
pieces, and that are become as smart as video games, but still played around the table and the electronics is hidden. It's just like you have a bunch of game pieces and you're playing with them, but they're tracking certain things. And I don't know, somebody is going to do something really amazing. That is, in my opinion, going to be maybe not the next killer app, but a future killer app in the world of tabletop games. Maybe it'll be role playing related, maybe not. I don't know.
All right. I guess before we go, you're doing a lot of stuff on Gen Con TV these days.
Yeah, I
Gonna,
love to thank you. I'd love to be able to promote what I'm doing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so about 2.5 years ago, uh, uh, I took over directly manage. I mean, I own Gen Con partners, but I don't manage Gen Con day to day. Turns out I was actually really not very good at it. So, and it's wonderful to own this game convention, but it's all logistics. It's all space planning and registration systems and stuff that aren't my bailiwick. And about 2.5 years ago, I took over directly managing the Gen Con streaming on Twitch. So twitch.tv/GenCon TV is my home. That's where I live. I am there a lot. I'm like two or three shows a week. I have a show on Monday mornings where I play strategy games against AIs. So currently I've been playing a lot of Sid Meier's Civilization
Mm-hmm.
6. I also have a weekly news show on Friday afternoons at 2 p.m. Pacific time where we sit around and talk about tabletop gaming news with my amazing co-hosts. And on Wednesday evenings, I have a show called Actoroki that I'm sometimes on, but I have a couple. It's live play, role playing in my World of Chaldea.
Mm-hmm.
I now have other DMs that run these games for me because turned out it's a lot of work to DM on stream and a little anxiety provoking as well. So I am there as a sort of the sage of Chaldea who kind of makes sure they don't go too far outside of what Chaldea is supposed to be. So, and then we have a whole bunch of other shows that independent producers do for us. You know, like Sarah Moore does Sarah's Table, Rem Alternus does Roll with Rem. We have a vampire show, Indie by Night, Dress to Quest, Blood on the Clock Tower. By the way, have you ever heard of this game, Stan? Blood on the Clock Tower? It is like the social deduction game on steroids. You know, like the game Mafia or
Yeah,
Werewolf that
yeah,
you used to
yeah.
play? Imagine like 50 people playing like 200 different roles. Like it is like, oh
Wow.
my God. Yeah, it is crazy. It's actually our biggest show on Chick on TV most weeks. Yeah, it's
Check that out.
another little corner. I mean, that's what's great about our hobby now. There's so many little corners. It'd be like, you just like flip up, like open a little window into this little
Right.
thing happening over here. And you look in there and you're like, oh my God, there's a whole ecosystem here. There's thousands of rabid gamers who are doing this thing that I didn't even know was going on. I mean, back in the 90s, we all knew everything that was going on and pretty much played all the games that were out because the industry was so small. Now it's, I don't know what's the future of role playing. I don't know, but I mean, the future is bright. There's
Yes.
so many more of us. There's enough people to support a lot of different things, and it's special and lovely and beautiful. And so are you. Thank you for having me on your show.
No, it's been. You know what? I've said a lot that this show gives me an excuse to to hang out with people that I want to, and it's hard to make the time. It's hard to find the reason why to do it. Oh, whoa. Oh well, people are going to watch and show up, and we can't disappoint Chris Andrew. He's got
Yeah. Yeah.
people want to
Chris
see it.
and Michael here. They're
Yeah.
thank you both for showing up here. I love engaging with chat. I hope I didn't do that too much, Dan.
Oh no, you were perfect. Perfection. Mwah.
One of the things I love about the Big on Stream is just like when people show up and stuff. So yeah. So Chris, Andrew, please keep watching Stan's show, but also
Please
consider
go watch Peter's shows too.
If you're not already.
I'm going to try and get an invitation to some of Peter's shows too. So
yeah, that'd be great.
Cross the streams. All right, so GenCon.com/TV is where to find the all the listings of all the shows. It's like your TV guide, but it's airing on Twitch.
Yeah. So Twitch.tv/GenConTV. That's where we're at.
Awesome. Peter, I could go on like this for hours, but it'd be better if we had some drinks and food while we did it. So, but I will try and have you back again because I think it would be great to talk more and expand it. There's so much left went unsaid.
I know so much. Like we'll put this little teaser out there. We didn't tell everybody the story how we met.
I was going to say that.
Put that one out there. That you gotta save that one for next time. And if you
want not in this country,
and if you want somebody to come in and interview you, I'd be happy to do that.
All right. See, we've got plans bubbling already. All right, I'm going to take you off screen, Peter, and then I'll come back and we can make our goodbyes. I'll do a little outro here.
Right.
Thank you, Peter, for coming. It was great conversation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. As I say, if you're watching now, good on you. Otherwise, you're watching this recorded. You didn't have a chance to talk to Peter. You should come back next week, and we'll have another guest live. As I said before, we have a free newsletter at 50yearsinthedungeon.substack.com. Go ahead and link up. Those people had a warning that this was happening. I invited them all through the newsletter. You would have known if you were on there. You'd also get to be the first people to see the finished cartoon homages, and if you're a paying subscriber, you get things like process videos that show the whole drawings coming together in a little reduced minute or 2 minute video. So it's a lot of fun. Anyway, thank you to Peter. Thank you, everyone, Michael and Chris and Corey, everyone else who showed up here. It was great having you in, and I'll be back next time for another episode of 50 Years in the Dungeon. See ya.